What's up, everyone? Welcome back to the Hawks-centric podcast. It's been a minute. The season's been over for about 6 or 7 weeks, but we've been hard at work, man, on this side. I've got a lot of draft content prepared. But before we do that, we're going to go through a couple iterations of some season reviews, right? And so my vision for this is to bring on different fans who have, slightly different perspectives of the Hawks. I think that there's a spectrum of fandom. There's delusional optimism, and then there's hyper realistic, which could be called pessimism. And I think, like every other fan base, we have guys alongside that spectrum. And so I'll let you figure out where you think this guy is. If you follow him on Twitter, you probably know. But I'm very happy to bring on my guy Preet. We're gonna talk through some Hawk stuff, some recent news which I wasn't expecting to cover, but we'll definitely touch on that as well before we get into the season review. But how you doing today, man?
My guy, David, thanks for having me. Happy to be on the pod.
For sure. And yeah, we're going to just go ahead and jump right into it. So there's some breaking news that's related to the president's of basketball operations search. So Landry Fields was fired about 6 or 7-ish weeks ago. The Hawks have went out and got two new senior VPs. The first one is from the Pelicans organization. I'm blanking on his name, but his last name is Graham, and he's brought in as sort of like the talent evaluator. So that's what he was credited for in his time in New Orleans. The biggest thing that I took away from that particular hiring is that I was a big fan of what the Pelicans have done in the draft, and I'm curious on your thoughts on that as well. His full name, I'm pulling it up right now, is
Bryson Graham.
Bryson Graham. Yeah, Bryson Graham. So he started off as an intern in the Pelicans organization about a decade ago, worked his way up to head video coordinator. He was doing all the grunt work. Read through an interview from him when he was featured on the Athletics 40 Under 40 in terms of front office executives. And he's very respected around the league. A lot of Pelican sources that I've heard from, both on Brad's podcast and also someone I spoke to, they say that he's been credited for the vast majority of their draft decisions. He was there almost exclusively as their draft guy. And so I'm curious on your thoughts on bringing him in.
Yeah, man. When I saw the news, I think he's the hire that you're most excited about. It doesn't seem like we know too much about Peter Dinwiddie yet, and I'm sure some information will come out about him. But I mean, you look at the Pelicans draft history, right? They got Trey Murphy, Herb Jones, Yves Misi. Like that's a quality group of prospects that you have kind of to go off of for a nice little track record behind Bryson's name. So kind of excited to see what he can bring. It's a pretty pivotal offseason for the Hawks. They got 2 draft picks in this draft, and you basically got to hope that they can bring on at least 1, if not 2, rotational players. So excited to see what Bryson does and what kind of prospects that they'll target for the whole regime and honestly and all. So
yeah, I definitely agree with that. And the other thing about Bryson is they also did a great job with undrafted free agents. So they brought in Jose Alvarado, they brought in Najee Marshall, both guys who have become replacement level players. Najee played a consequential role in Dallas. And so I think the Hawks in particular, they've been moving towards maximizing the margins a little bit more. So, you brought in Don Barlow on a 2-way. I thought at times like our 10 to 12 range was a better depth in comparison to other leagues with other teams, which is important in the regular season, not as important in the postseason, but especially for a team that's had some, injury attrition, having guys like Mohamed Gay, Don Barlow, Keaton Wallace, and then Jacob Toppin and Daquan Plowden. That was they were at least NBA level guys, even if they were still G League majority players. And I think that was a big difference maker. And hopefully they can continue that type of level scouting with Graham in the front office. The other guy who was hired, he was also hired as Peter Dinwiddie. He's a senior VP of analytics. Peter has been an exec for a very long time. I think he's at least a decade of service in the NBA. He's very respected. In some cases, he may be viewed as overqualified for the role, but I think what's important is that Onsi Soleil, who by all accounts, he was like as much of a generational prospect as you can get as a front office player. Like he was not player, but executive. He was part of like the sports business classroom, was the top of the class. He's been credited for some of the moves for the Hawks as well. And so you want to bring in guys who are experienced, though, because this is his first time running an organization, presumably as a number one. The Hawks are still looking for president of basketball operations, but I was listening to Brad's podcast a little bit earlier. By the way, if you haven't listened, go ahead and listen to that. But he was saying that if he would be surprised if they end up bringing another guy who would be ranking above Soleil at this point. So it seems like he's their guy. For everything I've heard, I'm not mad at it by any means. I think he's, again, like I don't have any sources particularly in the front office, but from I trust Brad and I trust what everyone else has been saying. And if he is credited for some of the moves of the last couple of years, then I think we're in good hands. And I think these guys coming in will complement that vision. The Pelicans have sort of drafted similarly, I would say, like in terms of like prioritizing length and versatility over the last couple of years. It'll be interesting to see how aggressive the Hawks are on the draft because you don't have a second round pick. And past 2 years, we traded into the second round or we also traded up. So we'll see if something like that happens. Another news item that I want to talk to you about, Myles Turner was connected to the Hawks, saying that the Hawks had interest. I don't think I've made my thoughts and opinions about him public on this podcast, but I'm curious on what you thought when you came across that.
Yeah, I mean, I think this was just basically a leverage play by his agent. I think they know that the Hawks have two centers that are going to hit free agency in Clint and Larry Nance. So I think he kind of just tossed the Hawks out there and be like, oh, that's a team that might be after him, so they can kind of just get his payday. I put it out there this morning that I'm not a fan of Myles Turner. I think he's a solid player, no doubt, but am I really going to pay an older center 4 years, 120 million when the Hawks have Onyeka under contract for what 4 years, 64 million? So I
Right.
just don't think the gap between them is worth double the contract. And after that, you kind of just, I think you just continue to build. There's plenty of center options I would target in this year's draft. And I know we'll get into that later, but it's just personally a hard pass for me. And I think he just re-signs with Indiana at the end of the day.
Yeah, I think he's reportedly he's looking for about 30 million a year, which
Yeah.
the Hawks would have to do some cap mechanisms to even get that free.
Mm-hmm.
You'd have to dip into the trade exception. I'd have to be a sign-in trade, and sign-in trades are also always a lot harder than just signing a player outright. And of course,
Especially in this cap,
oh yeah,
in
for
this
sure.
CBA.
And to have a player like him, who, all things considered, he is a 7-foot stretch big who can protect the rim, and that is a valuable archetype, 100%. But I think when you got to think about where you're putting your money and what portion of the cap are you putting money into. You've got Dyson's extension coming up. Trey's eligible for an extension this summer. And he's also going to be eligible next summer. So when you think about the cap and sort of balancing it that way, it'd be really hefty to put that much money into Myles. And he's also a bit more limited as a defender than I think most people may realize. If you're watching the finals, you may see that he continually lets SGA get penetration to the middle because he doesn't really move his feet as well in space. And he's also not a great rebounder either, which complicates things for the Hawks because, I mean, as we saw when Jalen went down, it's just a lot to be undersized at multiple positions and then ask Onyeka to cover it for everyone else. So I think he'd bring a little bit more trouble than he's worth. I think the best thing the Hawks could do was throw him an offer and force Indiana to sign it at a number that's a little bit higher than they expected. But again, they would take a lot of cap manipulation. So yeah, I'm very much so against that. I think it'd be a really bad move. And I really hope that that's just, again, like some agent speak as opposed to like legitimate interest from the Hawks side. But I do think they'll definitely be looking into center upgrades. Like, I think that's reasonable for sure.
Yep.
Now, in terms of guys on the free agent market, I'd much rather them look at Luke Cornett or Steven Adams as guys who can come in and be the venture big, ideally to help spot minutes for a rookie that we end up taking in the draft. But yeah, I want to go ahead and before we get into the draft at the end of the show, I want to talk through some preseason expectations. So for me, when I was coming into this season, I really wasn't expecting like a massive playoff run or anything like that. The biggest thing that I was really thinking about was, okay, will we be in the play-in? So I projected us to win 43 games and finish as a 7th seed, and we ended up cracking 40. I think, there's a big difference between finishing as the 8th versus the 7th seed. It's part of the reason why we probably ended up not making the playoffs. But with considering all the stuff, the attrition that we saw throughout the season, guys getting hurt, the amount of time that Jalen missed, of course, I think there was a pretty good chance they could have outperformed 40 wins. We could have been sitting here at 45, 46. And if you're sitting at 45, 46, now you're talking about competing with Detroit for the 6th seed. And I think with all things considered, that would be a success. Okay. This offense under Quinn Snyder actually generated the highest shot quality in the league. And I think that's a testament to Trey as much as it is a testament to Snyder's system, because this team was not by any means the most talented offensive team. And that's what happens when you play guys who are, a little bit raw in terms of offense. So if we take a look at this graph right here, you're looking at shot quality and true shooting percentage. Nobody generated better looks than Atlanta besides Denver. And there's other metrics that have the Hawks as number one. It's more so about converting on those looks, right? And so throughout the majority of the season, they weren't necessarily able to do so. There's some things that happened during the deadline. What did you think about this Hawks team going into the season? And then so we could just start that baseline, and then we'll talk through the rest of the season.
Yeah, I mean, going into the season, I was about as high as on Dyson Daniels as I think anybody in the fan base. So I had pretty high hopes that the season would be an improvement from the prior season. I thought that they would definitely. The hope was that they would be top 6 seed, and I
Mhm.
really thought that the team was built well enough with a good coaching staff that they could push for a top 6 seed. Optimistically, I thought they could push as high as 4, but granted, the injuries played out and they really just couldn't get to that number. I think, but generally, I had pretty high hopes for the team. And just I thought that the team was built well. Like you finally had a vision around Trey of long wings that can defend, they'll push the
Yep.
pace. And like you said, like Quinn's philosophy, I think finally was on display with the shot quality. But then you see as the season went on, just they just didn't have enough shooting to kind of requisite the shot quality that they had. And over the course of the season, when teams are killing you from three and you're giving up 3 point attempts, but you're not hitting your wide open corner threes, that basically puts you in the deficit. And then on top of that, you had a bunch of guys that are, like you said earlier, good 10 to 12 mans, but they've had to scale up to be your seventh and eighth guy over the course of 82 seasons. It kind of kills you.
Yeah, I think they definitely had the scheme and the construction to push for that top seed. Uh, if you like, these are my predictions before the season started. Obviously, pretty Hawks-centric. I've got Jalen Johnson as MIP. I've got Zach as Rookie of the Year, and I never really thought that Dyson would be able to push Victor for Depoy. But once Victor went down and that became almost a reality, like I was also similarly pretty high on him. I just didn't know what the offense would look like because he was so tentative in New Orleans. So I think he definitely stunned me. But just to give y'all some numbers about the Hawks season and why I would look at it as a success considering again the injuries and all the other things. Um, they were one of the best teams in the East against the best teams in the East. Like at one point, I think we were 7-0 or 7-1. There was no team in the association that had a better record against the Celtics, the Knicks, or the
Yeah,
Cavs. They had back-to-back wins over the Cavs in two different fashions. They blew them out nearly with offense in Atlanta, and then they really suffocated the best offense in the league defensively in that first game in Cleveland. We were really bad in the clutch last season. Uh, not this one that just finished. The year prior with DeJounte Murray on the team, the Hawks were 26th in the fourth quarter net rating and 23rd in assist percentage, and they were 26th in clutch net percentage, and they were 22nd in clutch win percentage. This year, we were sixth in fourth quarter net. All the teams above us were contenders. All the teams below us through the top 10 were contenders. And we were also ninth in clutch net rating. And the biggest thing that changed was the assist percentage. Okay. In that 2024 season, when DeJounte Murray and Trae Young were on the roster together, they had the lowest assist percentage in the clutch of any team in the NBA. And they were 23rd in the fourth. This season, they had the highest assist percentage in the fourth quarter and the fifth highest in the clutch. And what that tells me is yes, DeJounte wasn't a scheme fit, all those other things, but they were able to actually install an offense that worked in the clutch. Now, granted, and I know you share some of my frustrations with this, there were definitely moments where we were like, okay, does Trey need an ISO for the very
yeah,
last possession? And I think that's a fair criticism. I'd also say that every NBA team does that. I'm not saying that's like the best
yeah,
thing to do, but their process leading up to that was generally much better, much more improved than the years prior. And I thought that was really important. The other thing that I would point to, the year prior, 2023, 2024, we had the worst defense in the league against top 10 offenses. This year, we allowed 125 points per 100 possessions. This year, we were ninth, allowing 117 or so. And so I thought that's again like a massive difference. A lot of that's Dyson, but it's about their ability to be more cohesive on both ends. And I think
yeah,
Dyson's point of attack defense is a huge part of that. The fact that the value he brought as a secondary ball handler, leaning into Onyeka as a playmaker too, and starting him, having him, facilitate as a dribble handoffs and out of backdoor cuts. There were a lot of things throughout the season that led to that. I was curious, like, what were the other biggest things that you saw? Oh, the other thing I forgot to mention, the Hawks were also vastly improved as a transition offense. So that was a really weird thing. When you have Jalen Johnson on the floor, it's like, why would you not run more? You know what I mean? Like you have a guy who's super dynamic and one of the best transition players in the league, and they weren't getting out and running. Again, a lot of that is because of, I think Trey didn't trust guys to bring the ball up the floor. And then DeJounte wasn't as willing to throw those throwaway pass. And not to be too critical of them, I don't think they had the personnel on the floor to, like, you couldn't push it up to Sadiq Bey and trust him to run the fast break. You know what I mean? You couldn't put it to DeAndre Hunter and trust him to make the right decision in the open court. Dawson Daniels could do that. Jalen Johnson could do that. Zachary Rizachet, sometimes he could be iffy. He's a rookie, but I honestly trust him to make a better read in the open court than some of the guys that we just mentioned. And so they were top 5 in transition frequency. They finished first this year after finishing in the bottom 10 the year prior. And they were also top 10 in offensive rebounding percentage, and that's with Clint Capella missing some time. So I'm curious about where did you see the biggest growth or differences from that past season? Do you agree with some of the points that I just made?
Yeah, I mean, for starters, defensively they were much better. I think when we were at the highest peak of our season, I think Kirk Goldsberry especially had us around like the 12th best defense on the season. And I mean, if you're sitting at 12 with Trae Young on your basketball team, that's about as best as I think you can get. And that was naturally when we were winning too. We were above 500, so naturally, I think that was a big positive. I think switching from Clint to Onyeka and then letting Onyeka play to his strengths of being a switch big, letting him get out on the perimeter. It kind of sucks when you don't have Jalen there to be your weak side help, but naturally, when you have those two on the court together, I think the defensive numbers, and I can pull them up pretty quickly, but they're 2-man lineups. I think they were at like 111 defensive rating, which isn't great by any means, but like the fact that you have a foundation of these two long wing perimeter defenders, then you have a 4-man that can help on the backside, and you have a switchable 5. I think you really have a nice little philosophy around Trey. Another area you mentioned, like transition, the Hawks, they should be a team that pushes. You watch OKC and Indiana in these playoffs, and the teams that push, the teams that can generate easy offense, that's what you need to be. And the fact that you have a defensive player of the year candidate that generates deflection is going to be at top of the leaderboard in steals and just creating turnovers. That's a philosophy of just now everybody run for us and we're going to find you. Trey is always great with the full court passes. Jalen's getting up there, like put multiple ball handlers up there, have that versatility, and kind of just push the pace. And I think those were two really good strong suits. And I think surprisingly, the Hawks were, and you can correct me if I'm wrong. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but the Hawks were surprisingly really good at not turning the ball over despite playing at such a high pace. And so that was an area that back when Lloyd wanted to really push the pace, we were careless with the turnovers. We had so many like 25 turnover games, 26 turnover games, just because there's too many poor decision making. And then once you play that at such a high pace, you're naturally going to make more ill decisions. But under Quinn's this past season, they had a lot of good games where they minimized turnovers. Yeah, they had some bad quarters where they had like 6, 7, but naturally over the course of the game, they were pretty low. And I want to say they were within the top 10 of just keeping the ball and not turning it over. So to be able to play at a high pace, I think that's a great area for the Hawks that this past season is something they can continue to grow on.
Yeah, when you consider and you adjust for pace, I mean, the only teams who played faster and didn't turn the ball over more was like OKC, Indiana, and Denver, and Cleveland. But like everyone else, I mean, like we had a lower turnover percentage than Memphis, who had a higher pace, Washington, Toronto. It wasn't great relative to the league. It was 22nd over the entire course of the season. But again, when you adjust for the pace, that's not bad at all. So I was curious. In my opinion, though, I feel like they've really established principles that are going to carry over to this season. That's going to be really, really impactful. Like we know we're going to play fast. We know we're going to be more aggressive defensively. We know we can rely on forced turnovers from Dyson. They learned to trust Dyson a lot more throughout the season. Like I remember that first game against Brooklyn. I mean, they were over helping when he was on a defender. I was like, you don't need to give him that help. But they learned throughout the season. And I thought that, as much as you can, like you want to build good principles, even if you don't have everyone available. And I thought they did a really good job of doing that. So I was curious, do you have like a worst loss of a season? Because there's a couple that stick out to me, but I'm curious on your opinion.
I mean, the worst loss, and I hate to say it because it was super early, but losing to the Wizards to start the season was just set a bad taste in my mouth. Like I couldn't believe that they lost to the Wizards, but I guess that's what happened when David Roddy is on the court playing legit basketball minutes for your team. I would say I know they had. I was looking at it earlier this morning when you sent me the notes, and they had a loss to Denver back in December. And I know historically we've struggled against Denver, but it was
Yeah.
like a 140 to 110 drugging. Like I don't think we led. I think I'm pretty sure Denver led from tip off to the end of the game. So that's another one. But lastly, I think the bad loss I want to say is the play in. I don't think you're at home. You took like a 7 point lead. They called timeout. All the energy's bumping. Onyeka had the crowd going on that fast break, and then you let go, and it cost you your season, and you end up in the lottery again. Would have been nice to just get some playoff revenue, if anything, and get the experience for the young guys. So that was a tough one, but no real like big losses. I don't think this time around.
Yeah, that the playing loss was rough. I don't like Miami, and we were gonna run into Cleveland, which we saw against Indiana. They're not invincible. Like they deserved a lot of credit and respect for what they had in the regular season. But and again, it's a lot tougher when you don't have Jalen Johnson healthy because he wouldn't have
Yeah.
played in that series. But we would have gave them more run for their money than Miami did. Like Miami kind of
Oh,
rolled
no
over.
doubt, no
And
doubt.
for the sake of the product of the league, and then of course Hawks fans as well. And then like you mentioned, the young guys needed those reps. Like that would have been really consequential. I'm in full agreement with the the loss to Washington. We lost back to back at the
Yeah,
beginning of the season. Now I'm sure most people listening to this know that Washington hasn't been great. I'm not sure if you're aware to what extent they set a record over the last 25 years. There has not been a team that lost by as big of a margin on average than they did. So they lost on average by 12 to 13 points per night. Second biggest losing margin throughout a season in NBA history. So not a good basketball team, and they gave us a lot of problems. So that wasn't great. That would also be my pick. Now I'm curious about your best win. Again, I have a couple in mind, but I'm curious what you think.
honestly, this season was filled with a lot of good wins.
Yeah,
I'm surprised that the Hawks kind of get beat up by the top teams, but as you said, like we did a really good job against the Knicks, the Celtics, and go down the list. My favorite win personally, and people might call me a hater for this, is the the Cup game versus Boston. Dyson went for 28. They had a clutch defensive stops at the end. Huge win in Boston. Then this came after losing, I believe, or this was one of the first two one of the first two cup games. So it was really tough.
yeah,
It was nice to get that win on the board. Trey didn't play
mhm,
either. So you had 28. I think Dyson had 28, like 6 and 6. Jalen had a triple double. So you really see all those young Hawks really come together and make it. Another one I really liked was obviously the once we actually got into the cup against New York, Trey in the Garden, Dice on the ground. That was about
yeah.
as good as it gets. And you finally, again, another game where we were down like 9 or 10 for most of the game, and then you storm back. You see they chip away, getting stops, and I mean, no better time than beating New York in what's a big game, right?
No, facts. Those are great call outs. I also have the Celtics win without Trey. I thought that was like that was a huge moment for Dyson. I think that probably set the tone for him throughout the rest of the season.
Mm-hmm.
His aggressiveness waxed and waned, but I thought that he really showed up in that moment. It showed him what he could be when he leans into that aggression. So, um, I also have the back-to-back wins of the Cavs. I thought those were
Yeah,
huge statement wins. I was in the building for. Well, I mean, I go as a press conference as someone as a reporter, but I was in the building just as a fan with some friends for that second win. And so that was great to be there for that.
yeah.
Um, I think there was another win that I'm thinking of, but I can't remember.
The
I'm also
Bulls, the
the
Bulls, the
Bull.
other one that was on my list. They were
Oh
down
yeah,
20 in the second half, and then stormed back to
oh
win
yeah,
in the
yeah, yeah,
fourth.
big one,
Big
yeah. And
against the
that was
Bulls.
like the first game on Yika started, right? Are you talking about
Yeah,
that one or?
I think
Mhm.
it might. Yeah, I think so. I know. I don't think Jalen played in that game, and then
No,
but down 20 in the second half, and they stormed back and won. Oh, man,
the Pistons win with the trade game
that
winner
was
was really
scary.
nice.
Mm.
Um, but I want to ask you too about the trade deadline because I want to ask you about your initial reaction and then sort of like where you are now because I mean, the national media, they're not informed on us anyway. And so, of course, the consensus takeaways was, oh, what are they doing? Like, why would they trade away guys like Bogdanovich? I think I saw someone call DeAndre Hunter a franchise cornerstone, and I was like, yeah, I just know you're not paying attention. And
Yeah,
that's not to mean like as a fan, I didn't miss those guys. Like Dre's been with us a long time. Bogey's an absolute legend. I think he loves Atlanta. He had some huge moments for us in the playoffs, and he was one of my favorite players, hands down.
Yeah.
But with the way that that season was going for him, he wasn't giving us what we needed. And the biggest part about that trade is that we came into the season entirely reliant on his ability to create for the second unit and basically do what he did for Serbia in the World Cup. And whether it was injuries or just age or attrition or whatever it may be, like he wasn't himself. And that really took down our bench unit's potency. And we've historically been a pretty good bench.
Yeah.
And so when you get back Karis LeVert, George Niang, Terrence Mann, it doesn't look like a great return. Hawks fans were upset. National media was confused. My argument at the time was that yes, these guys aren't as talented, but you get a boost in connectivity, play finishing, and cohesion. And you have guys who are NBA level guys when we were playing G League guys prior.
Mhm.
So I was curious, what was your initial sort of takeaways from that trade, and then how do you feel about it after the season has played out?
Yeah, I'll say initially I was happy with both trades. To be honest, I think Dre's time in Atlanta was over. I just don't think that his knees are going to be healthy enough to play over the course of the 82 games, and they desperately need someone to fill in that wing
Yeah.
role to play over the course of the season. And sadly, I think for him, just the time was up that the moment they got any type of positive value, and it sucks that the positive value was swaps in this case and not either Jalen Tyson or their first, but
Yep.
they struck on that and just moved off and said, we'll take the contract hit. Initially, I liked the Bogey trade too because I thought that Terrence Mann was going to be a serviceable rotation player.
I did
But if
too.
you told me to look back on it now, as of today, I would say that that trade was a massive mistake simply for the fact that Bogey was going to have less years on his deal. You could have just, and I think, like you said, he was a locker room favorite. I think one of Trey's best friends, one of my
Yeah.
favorite players to watch in Atlanta. So naturally, I think they should have just kept that shorter contract. Though it sounds like Bogey wanted to be out, had some feelings that he wanted to be out anyway. So
Mhm.
that part sucks. But yeah, I think they're going to be looking here to either attach an asset or use Man in some sort of larger consolidation trade where he's salary filler. Because to be honest, that's a pretty negative contract that they'll have for another 1 or 2 seasons after this. So we'll see. But
Yeah.
both trades are pretty good for him. I thought they were going to be good. I just wouldn't do the Man one again.
Yeah, and I think the thing is like Bogey was legitimately one of the worst shooters in the league, which
Yeah.
is shocking. But at the same time, you're like, there's no way he's gonna do that forever, and he didn't. Like for the Clippers, he started to find a shot. He was an impactful bench guy, and I understand why they did it, and I'm not entirely mad about it. But I think what's really painful about it is the Hawks are gonna have a very long term contract on the books. I want to say I'm looking for the exact tool I use, but I want to say he signed through the next 3 years for 18 or $20 million, something like that.
Man or Bogey?
Terrence Mann.
Man is signed for until the 27-28 season's over for 15 and a half to 16 million. So you got
Mm,
what, 3 seasons under him before he hits unrestricted free agency. That
yeah,
might be worthy of attaching pick 22 and saying see ya.
yeah, and it's unfortunate because I mean you're only talking about 9% of the cap, but when you look at his historical like comps, like there's a tool I use that I'll pull up. It kind of like looks at this is from my guy over at NBAvisuals.com. So when you look at his like offensive comparisons, like even his archetype is not a very valuable one relative to the rest of the
Yeah.
league. So you can see here, like we're talking about like guys like Gary Harris, Josh Richardson. And what I thought he was going to do for us is kind of come in as a combo guard who can get downhill. And I was a very big fan of those first couple of games. Like I thought in the Wizards games and in the Heat games, like he was doing a great job slashing. Like as I'm going to let these plays run as we talk through it. And I think what was really frustrating about it is that he is capable of being a guy that can be a positive as a connector and as a play finisher because he's a great straight line driver, right? There are moments he got to his mid range pull up, turnaround fadeaways. What really started to hurt us though was like, I mean, you saw it in the playing game. He tackles Davion Mitchell for no reason. Sometimes he was forcing shots. And I think the other thing is this skill set is a lot more valuable if he's 6'6" or 6'7". You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
it's a lot harder to be a straight line driver against NBA quality teams and defenders, like actual contending level defenders when you're his size. And so he's kind of like he's in a strange role as a 6'3" off ball guard who isn't super athletic isn't super consistent as a shooter. And he also isn't like a massively impactful defender. You know, like
Yeah.
maybe earlier in the season, again, at this point, he's a little bit old. I don't think he's like so, I think he's serviceable as like a 10th man, but the Hawks unfortunately needed a little bit more from him. And again, at that number and that contract length, that's what makes it worse. Like, I think his on-court production would be fine if he was signed for the next 1 or 2 years at maybe a slightly lower number. But I think it's just tough because, you know, if you could swap him for Benedict Mathurin or Jonathan Kuminga, and I'm not saying just for the price, but I'm saying for the role. Like if you put Benedict Mathurin or Jonathan Kuminga in this role, as much as they have questions about their ability to read the floor, just their size, their free throw drawing ability, it's way more valuable. And I think that's really what it just comes down to, is that he's unfortunately just undersized for the role that the Hawks need him for. And it's something that, you know, honestly made me sad, man, because I was like, damn, we traded Boogie for this. And it's like,
Yeah.
you know, that's disrespectful to him. Now, in terms of Karras and Niang, I think those guys were much more additive and they were more consistently additive. And that makes sense. I mean, they've been replacement level NBA players for a long time. Niang famously has the highest winning percentage of any player since the 2020s. And when they arrived, the Hawks were bottom 10 in above the break and corner 3-point percentage. At the time that they joined the Hawks went back up to top 10. We saw some defensive slips. Now some of that's Niang, some of that's the Niang and Capella minutes. But Georges Niang was a top 5 catch and shoot 3-point shooter in both volume and efficiency since he came to Atlanta. His quick trigger, the sort of ghost screens, the drag screens, like he brought a lot of value as a shooter. Thank you all for listening to part 1 of this podcast of my conversation with Preet. Part 2 will cover player grades, how we feel about each player returning, as well as some draft news and our ideal picks at 13 and 22. Now, I'm going to give you all a choice. Before you go to part 2, you could take a look at the description and fill out that survey. I put a survey in to sort of gauge how the fan base feels about these players, give them grades, whether they want them to return. Or you can listen to part 2 first, listen to our rationale behind our personal grades, and then come back and fill out the survey. Either way, would really, really appreciate it, because I want to revisit this in about a week and see how the fan base on average feels about each player. And yeah, I think it'll be really interesting. Great thought exercise. So again, thank you all so much for listening to part 1. Hopefully I'll see you in part 2. Hopefully fill out the survey. And yeah, go Hawks.